Good afternoon, everybody. We're out here with Herbie the mini bike. Today we're going to be going through what we're actually going to work on tomorrow, and that's the wheels. So you notice I have the stock front wheel and rear wheel. One of the important differences here is the spacers that are in these. This is the whole point of the project. I know this sounds weird, but it's rather important to me to have this change. So, observe the rear wheel, same thing. You see we have the spacer in there, and I'm trying to change these spacers out, and the way to do it is with a different set of wheels here that's currently available from SB Racing Parts for this bike. So let's take a look at what we have. This is what has been shipped to us. I have a new rear wheel and a new front wheel. These are lighter and claimed to be a little bit skinnier. So part of this, we're going to be installing new tires since we're going to have something on the wheel. The other things that come with the kit are these captured wheel spacers. This is the whole point for me of doing this. Captured wheel spacers allow the spacers to stay in the wheel when you're taking the wheels on and off, so you don't have to try to line everything up. I know this sounds crazy, but I change wheels often enough that it matters to me. So, what's come with this kit is the wheels, front spacers, rear spacers, and then a set of bolts for the sprocket. Now, as we've received this, we have bearings here as well that have to be replaced that go with the spacers. So, if we take a look here, there is a difference. There's a rubber seal here. The other wheel here also has a rubber seal. That is something the stock wheels, taking a look here, they do not have any seals on them. They are not waterproof at all. This is just the bearing and then the spacer on the axle. So, the first thing we're going to have to do here is pull the bearings out so that we can install these in this wheel. What you are going to need to do this is a set of bearing pullers. If you do not have this, I don't recommend you attempt it. Get the right tool before you start. The other thing we're going to need is a bottle of Loctite. Again, to install the bolts for the sprocket, we want to Loctite those in. The other thing on the wheels, let's demonstrate this here, is it comes with a set of valves here, filler valves. All I did was just install them on the wheel very superficially. You'll see the mounting bolt. I have not tightened it yet. I'm also going to Loctite this because I don't want any seals and I don't want this ever coming loose inside the wheel. So, with that said, this is the project for today, and I will cover the rest of this in multiple parts in the video to break it up. I should point out a detail that's critically important here. The valve and which side of the wheel it sticks out. I could have put this on 180 degrees poking out the other side. That would be extremely bad, because this is the side that the brake disc goes on. This is the front wheel. If it sticks out this side, this will hit the caliper when it comes around and the wheel's rotating. You will otherwise bend this valve or potentially cause other problems with interference with the brake caliper. So make sure this is pointing to the opposite side and not the side with the brake disc. This isn't as important on the rear wheel. There's a sprocket on one side and a disc brake on the other side. This one I have not observed a problem with the brake caliper hitting, but it is critically important on the front. Otherwise you will bend the valve. You'll never be able to keep air in the wheel if you do that. Okay, let's get started. First step here is get the green Loctite. Why are we using green Loctite? Because it's penetrating instead of the blue. Up here we need to install the nuts to retain the Schrader valves. Now I am going to put just a drop in here. Here's something to watch out for. Hopefully you can see it. I don't want to get any Loctite inside the valve. That would glue the valve shut and you'd never be able to get air in the tires. So be very careful when applying the Loctite. I'm only putting a drop in. This is penetrating, so what that's going to do is it's going to wick into the threads down below, and then once I tighten everything, it should penetrate even though I haven't pre-coated everything. You could most certainly not do it the way that I'm doing it and take the valves apart, put the Loctite on, but I had a hard time getting the nut onto the valve. It tended to cross thread really easily. So I'm using the penetrating Loctite in this method to do this. Once you have it installed, grab a socket and tighten this. The valve here will tend to turn while you're turning it, so you're going to have to hold the valve and tighten the nut. That's all you have to do, simple as pie. On to the next step here. Removing the seals. Grab a screwdriver, pry up. Done. Now we can see the bearing. So go ahead and do that for all the others next. Next step is to pull the bearings out. So we have to have our bearing puller. We have to find the correct size adapter here. So I'm going to start with this one. Too small. This needs to fit snugly into the bearing. Too small. Next size up. This is slightly too large, but you certainly can't use one that is too small. So what I'm going to do is just grab a hammer and tap this in. And I can't do this with one hand, so... Okay, with our adapter, we're going to put that in. Note this has a slot in it. There's going to be essentially a bar with a screwdriver tip that's going to fit in that slot. So I wanted to point out that detail. Here, drive it all the way in until it's flush at the bottom. Okay, we are now going to drive our bearing out. So we have our special tool here. It looks like a screwdriver tip. Insert this through the bearing until it engages the puller. Now, you can see I'm rotating the shaft I inserted in, it's turning the entire thing. That tells you it's engaged correctly. Now, this is where the magic happens. We're going to use gravity to drive the bearing adapter out, and literally just dropping the wheel until we get the bearing to release. Now it's held in. Just use gravity. Voila! There's our bearing pulled out. We're now going to do that on the other side, and then same thing on the other wheel. Now that we've pulled the bearing out, the spacer was in the middle of the wheel. It has a rubber washer around it. Leave that on. That helps hold everything in the center of the wheel and keeps this from flopping around. So it's a key piece to keep the rubber washer on here. It helps center everything. Don't lose it. Another good question. Once you have the bearing driver and this linked together, how do you separate them? It's a very tight wedged together fit. How do you get these separated? Like that. Once you remove the bearing, you have to get the driver out of the bearing so you can use it on the other bearings. How do we do that? Piece of pipe has to be larger here than the driver so it can fall in. I'm going to set it up here. I'm going to take my shaft here and a hammer, which you can't see, and just bang this down until it releases. At that point, we'll have our freed up bearing, and we can use the tool on the next one. Tap, tap, tap. There we go. Bearing's free. We have our driver back, and we can do the next bearing. Okay, so we have the bearing pressed in using the press on this side. Now we're ready to do the last side. Important piece. This is critical. Don't forget to put the spacer in before you put the bearing in. You can't put it in afterwards. So get the bearing set up, and then I'm going to go put it on the shop press, and we will finish the rear wheel. Okay, we have our bearings in, everything's good. Here's the rear wheel with the captured wheel spacer marked left rear. Slides into the bearing and won't fall down. Now we can install it. Next step here is to install the brake disc and the rear sprocket, and also need to mount the tires that we have up there. Once that's done, we have this ready to go on the bike, and the spacers won't fall out when you're trying to install the wheel. In this step, I'm installing the rear brake disc. The important thing to note is the hole spacing. You can't mix up the left and right side of the wheel because the sprocket spacing and the spacing on the brake disc aren't exactly the same. So you can't mess up this step. So I've made a decision here after looking at this. Instead of using these studs and lock nuts on the rear sprocket, I am going to go with the stock setup, which is just a simple bolt. No separate nuts, no additional washers, just the bolts. Because I already have these drilled for safety wire, etc. from my old set of wheels. That's the way I'm gonna go. If you want to use these, feel free. Loctite them before you put them in. Make sure they seat all the way fully. You do you. If that helps you win a race, go for it. I'm going to be lazy and go with the same setup because I have two Kayos. I want to make sure everything is identical on them as much as possible.